Goed, goeiedag ENGT221 studente. Ons is in week 9, ons is besig met studie eenheid 5. Kan julle glo, ons is so te sê amper klaar met hierdie module ook. Ek hoop dit gaan nog goed met julle en dat ten spyte van omstandighede julle nog kop bo water kan hou ook. Julle aktiwiteite vir hierdie week, julle moet teen die einde van die naweek of die einde van Saterdag Assessment Activity 2 ingee asseblief, dan bly daar nog net Activity 4 oor wat eers oor 2 weke ingegee moet word, weer 'n korterige aktiwiteit. Al die punte is uit tot en met Activity 2 en 3. Activity 2 is klaar gemerk, maar ons wil graag die punte as 'n geheel uitgee, want ek is nog besig om 3 te merk, omdat die 2 met mekaar skakel. Goed, dit gaan maar 'n bietjie rof in terme van merkwerk en sulke goeders. Online beteken nie noodwendig vinnig nie, so ek is baie dankbaar vir julle geduld ook daar agter. En wees maar geduldig met julle ander lektore ook. Ek verstaan julle wil ook beplan ensovoorts, maar dankie in elk geval daarvoor. Goed, ons gaan vandag net weer die kontakbesonderhede ekskuus. Onthou asseblief as iets dringend is, e-pos eerder vir my as mevrou Bischoff. Vandag gaan ons na een van my gunsteling vakgebiede kyk, Semiotics. And we do this specifically so that you have some insight into analyzing advertising and media text. Now, what do I want you to learn from this? Firstly, it does tell you a little bit more about the persuasive nature of advertising and media text. And it also, obviously, we're going to give you an introduction of what semiotics is. And it gives you an analysis tool of how to analyze texts, any text that you see around you. Ons het mos gesê aan die begin, tekste kan in vele maniere gesien en geïnterpreteer word. En dit gaan in baie opsigte baie meer sin maak as ons nou hierdie praktiese riglyne gee, soos wat daai laaste uitkoms daar wys. Hoe jy die wetenskap van semiotiek, the science of semiotics, how you can use it in looking at the world around you. I did post 2 small things on eClass, which I'd like you to do before you carry on. You might just have started watching the video now. The one deals with exactly how you look at the world around you. Dis net 'n paar vrae, dis 'n ou aktiwiteit, dit tel niks nie. Vra jouself nie daai vrae af. Ons wil net jou kop aan die gang kry dat jy kan begin dink waaroor dit gaan. Dat jy kan reg wees vir hierdie les. The second thing I posted, and I want to say it from the start, it could be a controversial topic, but it gives you the essence of some of the detail, is the history of the swastika. Nou vir julle van die wat nie weet nie, die swastika is die bekendste daarvoor dat dit die simbool was van die Nazi regime in Duitsland voor en tydens die Tweede Wêreldoorlog. Maar die punt wat ek met daai artikel probeer illustreer is dat signs have different meaning in different contexts and in different societies. Go and read it. I'm going to briefly discuss it in class as well. It shouldn't take you more than 10 minutes to read that. I think 15 minutes to do both the stuff I placed on eClass. Okay, let's move on. I've said already we're going to discuss the term semiotics in class today, and we're going to look how to apply this theory to the text, not just persuasive and media text, but also the things happening around us. Dit is regtig iets wat mens baie laat dink oor hoe die wêreld saamgestel word ook en wat ons sien en wat ons daarmee maak ook. Okay. There's a couple of introductory things that we need to discuss, what semiotics means, who are considered the pioneers of semiotics, and then a couple of key points that we need to lead on to. At the end of the class, I will discuss the assessment as well, but let's start with this. Firstly, the word semiotics derived from the Greek word semion, which translates to sign. A more formal definition of semiotics is the study of signs and sign systems. Remember, as we'll say later again, signs does not just stand on their own, but they are part of a sign system as well. And then you've got things like codes and significances that come into it as well, which leans more to the cultural part of the sign. Ons gaan dit nou 'n bietjie verder bespreek dat jy presies verstaan waaroor dit gaan. famous semiotician that recently died, Umberto Eco. He wrote a couple of very interesting fictional and non-fictional novels. There are some quotes in your study guide about it. Eco said semiotics is the science of everything used to lie. The important thing that we can take from this is adverts is persuasive and it tries to convince you. It doesn't necessarily try to convince you of the truth, but it tries to convince you of what it wants you to buy and to invest your money in. Okay, if we move on to the next slide, the two fathers of semiotics. Firstly, Charles S. Peirce, known as C.S. Peirce. He's regarded as one of the fathers. The other one is Ferdinand de Saussure. But de Saussure focused more on linguistics. That's the study of writing signs. We'll get to the whole meaning behind signs as writing as well. Maar as julle mooi sal onthou, in 211 het ek vir julle video, was dit in 211? Maar in elk geval, dit gaan oor die oorsprong van waar ons alfabet vandaan kom. Onthou, ons alfabet is ook 'n klomp tekens wat bymekaar gegooi het, wat bepaalde betekenis gekry het oor die jare. De Saussure was more focused on linguistics, and in any case, those are the two bastions of the study of semiotics. Peirce specifically, he classified a sign, en dis baie belangrik om hierdie ding te verstaan. Dit is nie net die fisiese ding wat jy sien. He said it's a relationship between three things. The sign itself, die fisiese ding, its object, okay, dit waarna dit wat dit verteenwoordig, and its meaning or interpretant. Okay, interpretant is maar net hoe word hy geïnterpreteer. Dit gaan ons nou net 'n bietjie na kyk. So dis die fisiese ding wat jy voor jou sien, dit wat dit verteenwoordig en wat dit beteken daar agter. Dit is die hele sign daar agter. Jy kan nie hierdie sign vertaal as 'n teken nie. Dit is nie 'n teken nie. Okay. That is very important. Okay, so the sign, its object, what it represents, and the meaning behind that representation. Okay, a couple of things that we need to note about signs. I've said already, the world around us is full of signs, mostly visual. It's meestal visueel, but it often involves all five the human senses. Language, I've mentioned earlier, toe ek na die alfabet verwys is, one of the dominant sign systems in society. Dink daaraan as ons nie 'n alfabet gehad het nie. En onthou net, ons het 'n dominerende alfabet, die Romeinse alfabet, of die Arabiese alfabet, ekskuus. Is eintlik 'n bietjie van albei. Maar daar is 'n paar ander alfabette ook. Byvoorbeeld die Russiese alfabet, die Arabiese taalalfabet, en dan natuurlik die Griekse alfabet, waar goeders weer verander. Een ding wat byvoorbeeld gebeur is in Hebrews, wat ook 'n ander alfabet is, lees mens van regs na links en nie links na regs. Okay, then specifically, why do we need semiotics? Because within this context, we use it for advertising, for brand names, uniforms, flowers, not necessarily uniforms and flowers in this case, emotional reactions. Think about your emoticons that you use in WhatsApp. How it's a sign in itself. It's got meaning. It means certain things within certain contexts. En dan wil ek ook hê julle moet mooi daaraan dink. Hoeveel keer het dit nie al gebeur dat daar 'n misverstand is in 'n geskrewe konteks tussen twee persone nie. Ek verstaan I understand the sign in one way, and whoever receives the message or sends the message understands it in another way. That whole thing of denotation and connotation. Okay, that is also very important. Van hierdie goed sal julle teen al in Afrikaans ook gedoen het in Afro, maar ek wil graag vir julle 'n vars perspektief ook daar op gee. Importantly, nature can also be considered signs. Ons sal later 'n bietjie spesifiek daaroor ook praat. Signs, dis die belangrike ding wat ons ook moet onthou, can be individual, it can function on its own, or it can be part of a bigger system which includes a couple of signs. Okay, as I said there, signs also and the meaning forms part of the society in which they are, the conventions, the understanding that is around those signs. So dis baie belangrik om te onthou, om signs te verstaan. Different societies, en ek gaan nou by my voorbeeld daarvan kom met die swastika, may attribute different meanings to the same signs, or use different signs to refer to a single concept. As ons byvoorbeeld in die Suid-Afrikaanse konteks daaroor dink, daar is baie die oproer baie keer oor die toon van die ou Suid-Afrikaanse vlag en gewoonlik nie net twee kante, nie sommer 3 of 4 kante, wie weet wat sien. En dan ook byvoorbeeld die 4-kleur vlag van die Suid-Afrikaanse Republiek voor die Boereoorlog, wat vir baie mense nie noodwendig ek moet nou sê wat ek sê, nie noodwendig per se 'n anti-moderne betekenis het nie, maar 'n teken is van onafhanklikheid en van toe Afrikaners hulle eie republiek gehad het. Dinge het natuurlik drasties verander, sê dit ook. So weer eens wys dit net die feit dat in different societies different meanings can be attributed to the same signs. Also communities can have different signs that they or that are culturally and contextually bound. Dit is baie belangrik. Dis hoekom ons sê, dis hoekom Peers se beskrywing daarvan so goed werk. Want jy kan nie net die fisiese teken, ek gaan hom 'n teken noem, maar die vertaling is nie teken nie, sign. You can't just interpret it on its own. You need the culture and the context in which it happens. En dit gebeur met advertensies ook. Ons het dit hierdie week ook gesien met die EFF en kliks. You can't interpret it on its own. You need the background, you need the perceived meaning within that society. Now, these conventions are called codes. Dit is nie, ek kan amper sê, dit is nie rocket science nie, maar dit is nie moeilik om te verstaan. Jy moet net verstaan dat dit uit 3 dele bestaan en dan van daaraf behoort jy verder uit die voorbeelde te verstaan. Okay, if we move on, here is my example. Nou, die Nazi-party in Duitsland het van omtrent die vroeg 30s tot 1945 met die einde van die Tweede Wêreldoorlog was hulle aan die lewe geroep. Ek sien ek het 'n spelfout daar gegaan, om die same symbol wees. En hulle kenteken was hierdie swastika. Ek het gisterand, toe ek navorsing hieroor doen om dit vir julle te vertel, lees ek Hitler het spesifieke betekenisse agter die rooi, die wit en die swastika gesit. Die interessante ding, as jy na jou artikel ook gaan kyk is, die swastika is eintlik 'n baie ou Hindu teken wat niks met die fasistiese neigings of die fasisme van nazisme te doen gehad het nie. Die Nazis het hierdie swastika hulle eie probeer maak. Hulle het hulle eie betekenis daarin probeer gee. So hulle het so goed gedoen dat die swastika vandag nog in Duitsland verbied word, die toon daarvan. En daar is letterlik gemeenskapslede wat as een of ander hoe sou my ma nou gesê het, 'n gekke en dwaase skryf of deur in glase wat nou met spruitpyn dit iewers gaan maak het, wat dit onmiddellik gaan skoonmaak. Hulle sien dit nie noodwendig dadelik nie, maar daar's iemand wat uitkom met 'n hoë drukspuit en hulle maak dit skoon. Hierdie simbool kom uit baie ander kulture voor dit. Hierdie is nou net 'n Hindu voorbeeld daarvan. Ek het selfs gelees, die Grieke het dit gebruik. Inteendeel voor die Nazis dit gebruik het, was dit 'n teken van geluk, die swastika, en wat op baie selfs Engelse muntstukke gebruik is. So dit het 'n baie minder gelaaide betekenis gehad voordat die Nazi-party tot stand gekom het. En die mens kan vandag nog byvoorbeeld in ek weet in antieke Hindu kuns, in antieke Europese kuns, sien mens hierdie simbool ook, waar dit glad niks te doen het met dit wat die Nazis voorgestel het nie, maar as gevolg natuurlik van die besonderse tragedie wat die Tweede Wêreldoorlog was, die feit dat die Nazis die Jode en die mense wat hulle nie as Aries beskou het nie, in konsentrasiekampe ingevat het en verskriklike goeders met hulle gedoen het die swastika in 'n sekere sin bietjie van 'n gehate betekenis gekry. So that is the point I'm trying to make, that the same sign can have different meanings in different societies. Keep that in mind as well. But also be sensitive to the society you find yourself in and how your meaning of the sign and their meaning of the sign. Okay. Another thing Pierce said is one would have to know the sign and its object for a meaning to be attributed. So wat hy eintlik sê is, jy kan nie die betekenis verstaan as jy nie, if you don't know the sign and you don't know that what it represents. Okay, want alle tekens, gebruik ek weer die verkeerde woord, is 'n verteenwoordiging van iets anders. Ons gaan nou 'n bietjie kyk hoe klassifiseer ons dit. The NP has also said meaning in itself can be a sign or a sign system, so it can a sign can act on its own, or it can be part of a more system. And the more complex the meaning of a sign, the more signs are needed to explain it. Dit is, ek dink ons kom net baie agter vir al hier in Suid-Afrika. And the more opinions there will be as to the meaning of the sign. Ek dink die interessante gevolgtrekking wat hier gemaak word is hierdie is nie net iets wat in een vakgebied gevind word nie. Ons om betekenis te maak kan ons baie keer baie vakgebiede inbring ook. Julle gaan in 4de jaar gaan julle 'n literêre module doen en daar deel van jou analise is ook om hierdie semiotiese tekens raak te sien binne die boek wat jy gaan lees en die fliek wat jy gaan kyk. As jy nou begin lees Lord of the Flies en die fliek is Dead Poets Society, maar dit wag eers vir jou oor 2 jaar. Okay, so meaning cannot be made without the person trying to make meaning knowing the sign and knowing what the sign, what it represents. That's very important. Okay, meaning, how do we determine it? It's determined by 3 things. Cultural background, so jou kulturele milieu, the interpreter's own experience, want jy, onthou die hermeneutiese beginsel wat ons aan die begin van die module gehad het, jy bring ook iets tot die tafel om betekenis te maak agter dit. And then the combined pressure of the existing semiotic systems of the interpreter. Jy het amper half, you've built up a signed library, a signed archive, where you've attributed certain meanings to certain signs, and you draw on that to make meaning of the new sign you see in front of you. So that is very important to remember. En dit is baie keer, soos ek sê, weer eens veral in Suid-Afrika, wat mense tekort skiet. Hulle neem nie die kulturele agtergrond in ag nie. Hulle neem nie, of hulle gebruik net hulle eie ervaring en dan maak hulle opvleende of opruiende of plainweg sommer net simpel gevolgtrekkings van what a particular sign means. And one should be very careful of that because you will always tread on someone's toes from different cultural backgrounds. En jy sal baie keer bietjie oppervlakkig voorkom ook. Okay, 3 types of signs. I mentioned they are classified. Hierdie is nogal lekker, want as jy nou rondry en jy kyk uit vir goed, dan gaan jy dit begin herken en sê, hierdie teken en daai is daai teken. The first one is the most familiar one, I would say, and that is the iconic sign. Okay, this is the sign that looks exactly like the object which carries its meaning. So daar is geen twyfel oor wat jy voor jou sien en of daar verskeilde betekenis is nie. Okay, maar daar is een belangrike ding om te onthou. En dit het hierdie tekening is deur René Magritte, 'n Franse kunstenaar gemaak. Dit is die volgende. Hy het 'n tekening hierso van wat vir ons lyk soos 'n pyp. En daaronder in Frans staan hierdie is nie 'n pyp nie. Nou hoekom is dit nie 'n pyp nie? Vir die eenvoudige rede dat dit 'n tekening van 'n pyp is, 'n tekening van die nabootsing van 'n pyp. Okay, that's very important. This is not a pipe in itself. This is simply something that represents a pipe. Okay, en daar raak ons nou weer aan die definisie van signs. Dieselfde met hierdie foto van 'n leeumannetjie wat ek geneem het in die Kruger Wildtuin toe ek nou met verlof was. This is not a lion. This is a picture of a lion. En in algemene taal raak dit gewoonlik, maar dit raak geblur. Mense weet presies waarvan jy praat as jy dis 'n leeu, maar hierdie is eintlik 'n prentjie van hier. Dis eintlik 'n leer daai met pixels wat mekaar gestel het om soos 'n leeu te lyk en laat dit 'n leeu verteenwoordig. Okay, but these are typically iconic signs. They look almost exactly the same as the meaning that the sign carries. Dit wat die sign na verwys. Okay, ek gaan julle nou die verskil tussen die drie ook wys aan die einde dat ons dit ook bietjie beter verstaan. Then you have indexical signs. Signs that have meaning due to the continuity of the association with the object. Ek noem hulle sommer cause and effect signs. Dit is herkenbaar, maar daar is bepaalde betekenis hier agter. Kyk na hierdie byvoorbeeld. Hierdie lyk soos 'n mannetjie wat stap, okay? Maar dit is eintlik net 'n paar vorms wat bymekaar gevoeg is. So dis nie presies 'n mannetjie wat stap nie en dit het 'n bepaalde betekenis, baie meer kultureel of gemeenskaplik bepaal, binne 'n bepaalde konteks, of dit nou 'n Europese konteks is, Afrikaanse konteks is dit die teken, the sign that represents hiking. In this case, the picture of a knife and a fork, does this have anything to do with a knife and a fork? No, it has specifically directly to do with eating. It's an indication that there's a place to eat. But because there are certain connotations to knives and forks, they can be used as a sign for eating. In this case, again, a couple of shapes that are put together to represent the female form and represent the male form. It doesn't say anything about male or female. It indicates female, because we know this by association. We know this because ons is daarmee groot gemaak. Female toilets and male toilets. This, again, a couple of signs. A picture of a plane. It looks like a Boeing or an Airbus. What would that indicate? Does it indicate a plane? No. It traditionally indicates a airport. Okay. Dieselfde hierso. 'n Kruis. Ons weet dis nie 'n Christenkruis nie, want sy basis is nie so lank nie. Ons verstaan dit nie in daai konteks nie. Dit op sigself beteken nie iets nie. Dit is bloot die simbool. Dit kom natuurlik van die soos 'n rooi kruis af. Hulle noem dit ook as soos 'n kruis, maar die simbool vir mediese hulp. This one is more modern. It looks like a couple of arrows that goes around in a certain sequence, and we know this represents recycling. So weer eens, is iets wat ons merkbaar kan herken, maar the sign in itself isn't the meaning. Okay, it's the association with the meaning that is important. Here it looks like a stick figure throwing blocks of ice into his drink. It must be a massive drink, but this actually means that this is a sign for a dustbin. Okay, because that represents rubbish, although it doesn't look like it. This represents a dustbin, and this represents a human being throwing rubbish into a dustbin. This again, the traditional petrol pump, or what looks like a petrol pump. That doesn't mean that it does mean that you'll find petrol pumps, but this doesn't necessarily say directly that here you can fill up your car with petrol or diesel. The same with this phone receiver. Traditional phones don't really look like this anymore. They've got cords or they're cordless, but this indicates that there is a telephone available nearby. 'n ander manier om hierdie te onthou is die smoke and fire effect. If you see smoke, it points to the fact that there is fire. Okay, om indexical signs te verstaan. So we've discussed so far iconic signs and then indexical signs. The last sign system is purely based on symbolism. Dit is excuse tog heeltemal verteenwoordig. Okay, signs which carry meaning based on cultural and social agreement. For example, the Roman alphabet. Hoekom is daai tekentjie wat omgekeerde driehoek met 'n streepie deur is? Hoekom verteenwoordig hy die klank A of A? Want dit is in 'n konvensie, 'n sosiale konvensie of kultuur ooreengekom. Here are a couple of examples. This one on the right represents radioactiviteit as 'n waarskuwing, maar dit lyk niks soos radioactiviteit nie. Okay, daar's geen konnotasie daar agter nie. Daar's 'n konnotasie daar agter, maar dit lyk niks soos dit nie. Hierdie is dalk bietjie nader aan die waarheid, maar die rede hoekom ek hierdie illustrasie van kruise gedeel het, is dit is ook verteenwoordiging van verskillende denominasies van Christendom. In die gereformeerde tradisie is ons nie baie lief daarvoor om noodwendig figuurlik vir figuurlikheid die kruis te wys nie. Maar elkeen van hierdie kruise, ek erken van hulle, ek dink hierdie is Grieks ortodoks. Ek is nie seker wat daai en is nie. Hier's 'n paar ortodokse kerke, soos die Russiese ortodokse kerke. Selfs hierdie is ek dink meer 'n Duitse kerk. Daai een, hier's dalk selfs 'n kruis wat spesifiek na die Rooms-Katolieke verwys. Die algemene the general sign of the cross is very recognizable as Christian, but these individual things pointed more to a symbolic sign that shows each of these symbols represent different church denominations. So we've had three signs. We've had iconic signs, which looks exactly like the object, which carries its meaning. Then we've got indexical signs that look similar to the object, but they have meaning through its association. Ek het genoem byvoorbeeld, hier is die foto van die mannetjie en die amper sê die wyfie, die man en die vrou, en dit dui publieke toilette aan. Dit het niks direct met man en vrou te doen nie. I mentioned the example smoke and fire. The smoke points out that there's fire. So in this case, if we have a look at the sign, this will be the smoke. that is an indication of something else. Okay. In hierdie geval verskillende geslagte se badkamers. Okay. Here's a typical or three drie vergelykings. Iconic signs, dit lyk presies soos die fiets wat dit na verwys. Indexical signs, hierdie is 'n foto van 'n kopbeen en twee bene en dit beteken pas op, dit is toksies, dit is giftig, dit sal jou doodmaak. Waar natuurlik die bene vandaan kom, maar die bene in sigself beteken niks nie. Dit is 'n verwysing na die dood. Dit is presies waar dit gaan. And then here's a symbolical signs. I think this is some Christian sign as well, but there's very little. The sign itself, as you see, it doesn't define itself. That's very important. Hier is nog een, iconic, symbolic en indexical. Hierdie mannetjie lyk soos 'n mannetjie, alhoewel dit nou 'n stokmannetjie is. Symbolic, wat verteenwoordig hierdie teken met die Romeinse alfabet, die agtergrond van rooi. Dit beteken is en daar staan nou daai staan nou ook stop daar, maar hierdie is 'n sign system in sy eie en daai is 'n sign system in sy eie en saam met hulle betekenis. And then indexical, this finger points you to something. It doesn't necessarily mean anything specific, it just is a pointer. Bietjie dalk meer tasbare voorbeeld, die begrip van hart. Iconic, 'n fisiese hart self soos wat hy in jou en my borskas klop. Hy lyk so. Symbolic, hierdie simbool van 'n hartjie. Dit is nie 'n hartjie net self nie. Dit verteenwoordig gewoonlik net 'n hart en die konnotasie van liefde daar agter. Indexical, hierdie man hou sy bors vas rondom sy hart. En as jy 'n bietjie kulturele en sosiale agtergrond het, weet jy gewoonlik dit is wat gebeur met mense wat op die punt staan om 'n hartaanval te kry. Besig is om 'n hartaanval te kry. So dis hoekom dit indexical is, indexical. Okay. We now get to the point where we start applying what we've learned to these advertisements and specifically persuasive text. I've chosen mainly advertisements. There will be 3 texts, but we're going to discuss this a little bit as to how we make meaning of this. Okay, the important thing is to start from the outside and move in. Die belangrike ding om jou te vra is binne watter gemeenskap of kultuur geskied hierdie ding. Die tweede ding om dan te vra is wat se letterlike goede sien jou daar? Wat se ikoniese signs sien jou daar? Dan die derde ding wat jy is om te vra is what indexical signs does this text hold? So what cause and effect is there? And then the third thing is what symbols do you see that can be represented by symbolical signs? Okay, let's just a bit of an introduction. I said you must keep the social context in mind. It's very applicable to advertising in media text. And the important thing is dit maak sin, want ons verduidelik dit ook nou so. It is often structured in certain ways, and that's why semiotics is very applicable. Okay, there might be more, die ander ding wat ons moet onthou is, daar kan meer as een analise hiervan wees. It all depends on the interpreter. Onthou in die hermeneutiese proses, jy bring jou eie agtergrond ook na die situasie waar jy met betekenis maak. And there should be a large area of agreement between different interpretations. So wat jy eintlik sê is jy kan nie net verskoon nou die woord, maar randomly goeders opmaak nie. Daar moet goeders wees wat dit ondersteun en dit moet populêr aanvaar word, want anders is dit nie meer kultureel of gemeenskaplik gebonde nie. That is very important. Okay, here's the first ad we see here. Okay, the background here, what do we physically see is we see a lit up background. We see looks like car keys with a key ring, and then that is typically the iconic things. There are a couple of iconic signs in the sense that we recognize the Roman alphabet, we recognize different fonts, different colors, things that are exactly as they seem. Now we delve a little bit deeper. Okay, and we see here that this key almost looks like it's shaped as a firearm, a gun. Okay, dit is 'n handwapen. Dit is baie belangrik om dit te verstaan. Now we go to our indexical interpretation of this. Waarna verwys dit? Ons weet dat gewere gevaarlik is en potensieel mense kan doodmaak. Is dit noodwendig so met karre? Karre op hulle eie kan nie mense doodmaak nie. Okay. Nou moet ons verder na die indexicale gedeelte daarvan kyk. Okay, the indexical sign. And we read this. It takes one life every 5 seconds. And then it says drive safe. Nou as jy bietjie weet, die wêreld is meestal verdeel tussen mense wat which is pro-gun ownership and anti-gun ownership. Now the anti-gun ownership side always says that the gun takes a life every so and so, or a gun takes life every so and so. They've now appropriated this as part of the indexical signs, and they are attaching this to driving. And they specifically say they drive safe. Kan julle sien hoe ek hierdie ding stuk vir stuk verduidelik? And they say there a car key, but what they actually mean is a car accident, which is representative of a car key in this case, takes one life every 25 seconds. Now, I think the Frontier Post, it looks like a .com website, is in America. So this will typically be applicable to the American society. But because everyone or most of the world drives cars, most of the world knows guns, they can make this connection very easily. The next advert is pretty upsetting. What we see here is what looks like a newborn baby. We can say that because we recognize this specific hospital identification tag. So we've already made a form of interpretant there. And we see the baby looks rather dirty. It's busy crying. It looks like it's pretty newly born, and from its mouth comes what looks like, I can at least say, an insect of some sorts, and we can pretty well assume that it looks like a cockroach. Now then they give meaning to this as well. There are no silver spoons for children born into poverty. Okay, now silver spoons, if you've got the cultural background, usually I think it's the grandparents or the parents give a newborn baby a small silver spoon as a commemoration of their death. Of their birth. The important thing to remember about this is also the concept of spoon feeding, the feeding of the baby done by the parents. Now the whole issue behind here is poverty. What do we associate with poverty? Obviously we associate uncleanliness, unhygienic circumstances. You can see the cockroach here, which normally we find in unhygienic circumstances. And then the silver spoon is not just a way of feeding oneself, but it is also the start of success. Silver being valuable, of course. And in place of the silver spoon, they've placed a cockroach here, which is associated with unhygienic, poor uncleanliness situations. And the point they're trying to make is that many children are born into a poverty, and this is the way that they almost grow up, which is of course very tragic. I think this is possibly a charity, it seems like it. If I have a look at their brand logo down here, there's Bible on a brand logo and say Aya is a sign. Okay, so this doesn't really tell us any much unless you know what Barnardo's is. Barnardo's then is probably a charity which tries to care for these young children who are born into poverty. The next two ads that I'd like you to show, the one is for Ford. Now we can already understand the societal and cultural background behind Ford. We know Ford as a manufacturer of cars, and then this looks like a typical Ford key, and there's a specific pattern to it. If you don't know what the city looks like, you wouldn't realize, but this looks like a silhouette of a city. And then they say there above another sign system which comes into play there. This city is in your hands. So what they basically, the indexical meaning behind this is, if you drive a Ford, you'll feel welcome in the city. Remember, that's one interpretation. You can have another interpretation as well. And then there's of course background colors associated with Ford to highlight that this is actually a Ford sign system behind it. There's iconic signs, the Ford badge, for example, the car key that we see here. The silhouette of the city can also be regarded as iconic, but it is a whole sign system combined together to make meaning. This is an ad not necessarily understood directly, but I'm sure there'll be both fully informed and partially informed there could be interpretations of that. We see here what looks like a pavement or a rough surface. It's not tiled, and on it is what looks like nou kan ek nie onthou wat 'n sygstok in Engels is nie, maar in 'n geval there's a little sygstokkie there, and we see ants here busy walking, but it looks like they're walking around the sucker, I think it's called in English if I recall correctly now. And traditionally ants would thrive on this because it's got sugar in, we know that. And then the whole ad behind this sucker is a lollipop. This what the name is. A lollipop is sugar free. Of course, there's an iconic sign of the brand name Chupa Chups. Okay, so hulle verkoopspunt hier is ons sygstokkies is suikervry. The last one here, I've done more in a way of explaining this. I've said there's signifiers. What do you see? Firstly, we see text. It says fight cancer. It's pretty big, and then with knowledge, strong black and white contrast makes it stand out. Picture style is a bit totalitarian propaganda. Gaan kyk maar na die Eerste en Tweede Wêreldoorlog plakate wat hulle gehad het. Dis baie elemente daarvan van maak jouself reg vir die geveg. Ons is 'n groot mag teenoor die oppositie. Importantly, this could be regarded as Mother Liberty, and we know there's an American context because of that, what they say there, or was it Lady Liberty, not Mother Liberty? And then she's got a sword in hand. Okay, so ons erken hierdie swaard, ons erken hierdie as twee slange om dit. Die slang in sigself beteken dit nie, want 'n slang beteken niks nie, want 'n slang het natuurlik negatiewe konnotasie, maar ons weet dat die teken vir die mediese wetenskap is twee slange wat so om een of ander iets krul. En dit is die belangrike ding. Dit gaan daaroor dat dit 'n mediese geveg is. Kan jy sien hoe ek waarde en betekenis aan hierdie ding deur om op te breek in stukke te analiseer. Lady Liberty in itself, if you think of the Statue of Liberty, of course, represents American values to a certain sense. And then if you look at the tone in which it was written, enlist in the Women's Field Army. So this is very much like a military poster. Because they intend to fight cancer like they would fight the enemy, and they regard cancer as the enemy. Ek wil net gou gaan seker maak van julle assessering. Verskoon my net 'n oomblik, ek wil hom net hier oopmaak. Ek het gister na hom gaan kyk, dat ek hom vinnig met julle kan bespreek, en dan is ons ook klaar vir die dag. Hierdie is die regte een. Goed, en dit is assessment 4. Just give me a chance to get there. Ek kan nou om die dood nie onthou waar dit gegaan het nie. Okay, assessment 4 will give you 3 examples on E-class. You must identify them either as iconic, indexical, or symbolic signs. If you think, and I'm going to play some signs on that, if you think it could be both of these signs, you need to explain. That's where those 2 extra marks comes from. So jy gaan moet sê hierdie is iconic, hierdie is indexical, en hierdie is symbolic, maar ek gaan vir ten minste een van hulle gaan ek een vir julle 'n voorbeeld vir julle gee wat al 2 kan wees. So ons sal dit 10 en so op E-klas. Ek moet net 'n bietjie gaan uitwerk hoe ons dit op E-klas gaan plaas, dat dit vir julle gebruikersvriendelik is. Jy hoef dit nie te gaan skryf of enige so iets nie. Jy gaan dit net op E-klas doen. Ek sal dit met mevrou Bischoff reël dat sy dit vir julle plaas binne die volgende week. Okay, students, thank you very much for your time. I hope you've learned something. As I said, this is one of my favorite topics, and I hope when you go and walk around and look around now, you'll start looking more in terms of things outside you and how these systems work, these systems of science. And if you'd like to have a further conversation on this, you're welcome to email me. There's a couple of books in the library as well that will give you further information on this. I appreciate your time. Thank you. Bye-bye.